Hello everyone, I'm MVL and welcome to another episode of Game Hunting. The first location we're going to check out is Once Cash Centre in Exeter. This is one of two of these locations. The other is in an indoor market, I believe, but the oldest stuff they had there was PlayStation 1, whereas this place had a ton of cartridge games, which we will check out in this video. They had Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance loose cartridges, which I root through, and there's a lot of good stuff to show there. But they also had some of the more modern systems, as you can see. We're going to take a look at these games, then we're going to look at the cabinet in this location, and then we can root through all of those loose cartridges that I got to look at. The staff was very nice and let me dig through all of these loose cartridges for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games, and some other stuff, which was very cool. And then we're going to take a look at another location, which is Game Zone in Plymouth. And then we're going to take a look at the pickups at the end of the video. But as you can see here, they've got some of the more modern systems like PlayStation, PlayStation 2, original Xbox, and Xbox 360 here. I am on the lookout for a lot of games from these systems as well, especially oddities. And these systems are a lot cheaper to collect for than some of the older cartridge-based systems and the perceived value of the games on those systems. And also, these systems are cheaper to collect for than the current generation systems, where new games are pretty expensive. If you're getting into collecting, I do recommend systems like the PlayStation 1 or the PlayStation 2, not going after the rarer, more sought after games, but you can get a lot of great games for a great price on these systems. Here's a game that was interesting to me, and I did pick that one up. You'll see that in the pickups at the end of the video. But like you see here, you can get some great games like Final Fantasy 9 and Final Fantasy 8 there for £12, which is a reasonable price and cheaper than they were when they came out new, which is awesome. As you can see, they had a couple of uncommon PlayStation 1 games here, most of which I already had, but that was very nice to see. Speaking of nice to see, they had some cool stuff in the cabinet here, including some cartridge games and some notable things for some of the newer systems that were safely kept behind glass. They had some choice PlayStation 1 games over there and a PlayStation 1 console in the box. Among the games that are more valuable on this system are things like Silent Hill, which I already have thankfully, but that's a great game. They also had some NES games over here and some N64 titles, as well as a bunch of Switch games. I think these Switch games are probably in the cabinets because they have the cartridges inside the cases, and since they are more expensive than the PlayStation 2 games, for example, they probably don't want anyone picking them up and walking away with them without paying. We also saw some NES games there and some Game Boy games here, and I did pick up an NES game and that Game Boy game, Shadow Warriors, and you'll see that in the pickups at the end of the video. But fear not, cartridge enthusiasts, we're about to check out a ton more cartridge-based games for the Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Advance, and some other stuff, because they had a bunch of stuff behind the counter that the staff were awesome and let me just root through and see what I wanted. And I also picked up some Game Boy Advanced boxed games and some boxes to complete some of my cartridges for the Game Boy Advance that I didn't have boxes for in the first place. So now you're getting a look behind the counter here. As you can see, they had a wide variety of things, including uncommon items like cassette tape games, or what I should call dataset games for the ZX Spectrum there. My personal preference of vintage computer, if you will, is the Commodore 64, but it was really cool to see that. Speaking of cool stuff to see, here we are rooting through Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and some Game Boy Advance games here as well. They also had things like N64 cartridges, there was WrestleMania 2000 there, and there are some amazing games here. And I mean really, throughout all of the consoles that they had games for here, there really were some diamonds in the rough at some pretty good prices as well, which makes me think that maybe most of the people that come to this location are perhaps after only modern games, and these games get looked over. But for example, Phalanx there is a fantastic game. I'm honestly not overstating how uncommon it is in my area to find such a large variety of great retro games. They had stuff like Final Fantasy for the PlayStation 1, Pokemon Stadium and Diddy Kong Racing for the N64, and some great Game Boy titles here as well. Unfortunately, most of these games I already had, but for anyone that is looking for this stuff, this location is absolutely fantastic. And it really was quite a treat to dig through these games and see what they had. Credit to the staff for being so welcoming and so nice to allow me to just dig through these containers that were behind the counter to see what I like. This was a real treat, and I'm so thankful I found this place, especially as I did procure a bunch of great pickups which we will go through at the end of the video. And obviously every game here wasn't a gem in of itself, but the overall variety that they had here was absolutely amazing, and they had games for lots of different retro systems as well as modern systems as well. Over here they had some Super Nintendo games, including games in the box, and they had lots of boxed games for the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, particularly the Game Boy Advance, which I was particularly interested in a bunch of games they had that were in the box. Now, a couple of these games I did have the cartridge for, but I did not have the box for. And not every place would allow you to buy the container or the box only, and in this case the box and manual, but not the cartridge. But this place was really awesome, and they let me pick up a couple of games here, box only, sort of exchanging the cartridge back for a reduced price on the boxed game. And as you can see, a lot of these games were very cheap. These X-Men games were particularly cheap in the box, and that was very nice to see. I didn't know a lot about every game here, but I definitely wanted to pick some stuff up. So here's what I picked up from here, and we'll go over that in more detail at the end of the video, including gameplay footage for the pickups at the very end of the video. But those last two games there, Star X and Iridion II, were box and booklet only at a reduced price, and I also picked up Shadow Warriors on the Game Boy as well. The other location we're going to check out in this video is Game Zone in Plymouth, and as you can see, this place is stacked with games from modern systems to retro systems as well. And one thing this place does cater to is the higher end complete in box collectors, as well as they have a lot of stuff in their cabinets which is really high end and would be sought after for the complete in box collector. But as you can see, they also had a lot of games from the modern systems and retro systems as well on the shelves for any gamer to come in and enjoy. They had a lot of stuff that was on the more uncommon end as well, which was great to see, and that is particularly the kind of thing that I am interested in picking up. I did pick up a couple of PlayStation 1 games from this location, and you will see that at the end of the video in the pickups section of this video. One thing I really liked to see was that they had a bunch of old computer games here, games like Defender, which was very nice to see in the big box. It's getting harder and harder to find big box PC games from any PC system, whether it be the personal computer, the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, or whatever system you are looking to get games for. The big boxes, the cardboard boxes, often got beat up and destroyed, and often you would only find the game itself in the smaller case. In the case of PC games, personal computer games, you would often find the jewel cases or the CD style cases rather than the cardboard big boxes. So it's getting harder to find these complete packages in good condition, so that was very cool to see. I have been to this place a couple of times before, and it's always great to have a look through this place. They've always got a wide selection of games at this location, and they're still going strong, which is very nice to see. So I had a great look around this place, and I grabbed all the footage I was able to grab at this particular venture. They had some great stuff here, as you can see, like Master System games, which is always great to see. A lot of titles that I already had, but as I mentioned, I did find a couple of uncommon games when I was checking this place out. Here are the cabinets that I alluded to earlier, or one of the cabinets I should say, because they had a couple of cabinets in this place where they have the choice games, or the more sought after games, the higher end games if you will, and these were for the most part, I believe, complete with the manuals and so forth and all of the inserts. So they were catering to that higher end collector, if you will, the complete in-box collector. So these things would be complete and in great condition. They had a couple of loose cartridges here as well, things put aside that would be more sought after, and a bunch of Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance loose cartridges on the cheaper end here as well, which is nice to see, because that is something that I do like to have a look through. I like to grab games that are less sought after as well for things like the PlayStation 1 and the Game Boy system, so that's really cool to see. And they definitely had a wide variety of things here from all of the systems. For example, things like the Sega Master System, the Sega CD or Mega CD as we call it in my region, the PlayStation Portable, and over here they have some imported PlayStation 1 games. These things are some of the more uncommon things or rarer things to find in my region, so it was very cool to see these on display in this location and be available to purchase as well. Some great Mega CD titles here. All of the sought after titles were included for a lot of systems here, like the PlayStation 1, the Resident Evil games, and Silent Hill. Games that a lot of people want and that they're very sought after. You can get them here, which is very cool to see. They had Grand Theft Auto, they had Mortal Kombat, they had PlayStation Portable and Dreamcast stuff here as well. And as a note, most of the cabinet stuff was in top condition and had the inserts and booklets and whatever you'd expect to be with it included as well. They did have a fantastic selection of Game Boy games here and cartridge games for things like the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 and some NES games there as well. Likewise, many of these games were more sought after, thus separated in these cabinets, and they had some particularly sought after items here as well. It's always great as well to see Atari games here, and they had some Atari 2600 games at the bottom of that cabinet. In my region, things like NES and Atari 2600, particularly in my area that is, are actually pretty hard to find, so I'm always glad to see them when I do see those games out and about. This section here had some Nintendo 64, NES, and the aforementioned Atari games at the bottom of the cabinet there. And on the right hand side, this cabinet had Super Nintendo games, boxed Super Nintendo games, and loose cartridges. And there was a Game Genie at the bottom there, and some Game Gear games, loose carts with manuals. And they also had this R-Type free and Super R-Type collector's editions, which were pretty cool to see as well. This section here had some Sega and some Sony games. They had Master System, Mega Drive, and PlayStation 1 games in this section of cabinets here. And it was very cool to see these boxed Mega Drive and of course Master System games, and a couple of loose cartridges here which were also in one of these cabinets. They had some long box Sega Saturn games there as well, and a couple of jewel cases or CD cases below that for some more Sega CD style games. Above there they had some more boxed Mega Drive and of course Master System games. One game I did pick out here was MiG-29 because I hadn't seen this game before, and I initially and mistakenly thought it might be similar to the unlicensed Codemasters NES game of the same name. Here you can see they had some loose cartridges for the Mega Drive, or as you may know it overseas as the Genesis. Above that, of course, they had boxed Mega Drive games and Master System games. Below that they had some GameCube games, some Sega Saturn games, and some more Mega CD games. They certainly had a wide selection here and a lot of sought after games, a lot of games people would love to add to their collections, and there's no question about that. They had a healthy amount of PlayStation 1 games here, a bunch of really great games. A lot of them I already had, but it was still really nice to see them at a local location. Over here they had some Game Boy games and then some more Game Gear loose cartridges over there in that cabinet, which is at the till area on top of the front desk. And next to this they had a rack of DS and 3DS games, which is definitely a system or systems that is getting more popular to collect for. But that's all the footage I was able to get from this location, and I did pick up 2 PlayStation 1 games which we're about to take a look at in the pickups. So without further ado, let's check out what I picked up. So what did I pick up? Well, first of all, from Once Cash Center in Exeter, I picked up Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers on the NES. This game was about £10 or £12, and it normally goes for about 20, so I saved about £8 or £10, which was a pretty good deal, and I was very happy to pick up this awesome game. Now, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers 2 is a ludicrously expensive game. This game, not so much, but it's still a really good game from Capcom. The game is very colourful and fun, and you spend much of it picking up items and hurling them at enemies as you progress through the platforming levels, running and taking out enemies as you go. This is a game I've definitely been after for quite some time, and I'm really glad to find it at a good price so I can fill in that gap in my NES collection. Fantastic game if you haven't checked it out. You can see from the gameplay footage this game is a ton of fun, and I really recommend checking it out. So that's Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers on the NES. Another game I picked up from that location in Exeter is Shadow Warriors, which came in this protective case, which is always good to have. And this is on the Game Boy. This game is also known as Ninja Gaiden Shadow Overseas, and this is a really cool platforming game on the Game Boy. It runs a little bit slowly because it is running on Game Boy hardware. It has those Game Boy graphics, but let nothing fool you, this is a very fun game. It feels a lot like Ninja Gaiden, but with the pace of this game, it's a lot more manageable and more forgiving than other Ninja Gaiden games, at least from the outset. I got this game for around about £30, which is at least about £10 cheaper if you were to pick something like this up from somewhere like eBay with the reseller prices you get from online pricing. This game is a lot of fun, and it's very cool to grab this. It's certainly a sought after game and uncommon in my area, so I'm very happy to find it and add it to my Game Boy collection. And I have to say, this game is incredibly enjoyable. That's Shadow Warriors on the Game Boy. Next up, I picked up 2 games from the same location again, Once Cash Center in Exeter, that I already had, but I did not have the box and the manuals for, at least in one instance, the manual in good condition. So I will show you those, and I will show you gameplay footage, but I actually already had these games. The first one is Iridion II on the Game Boy Advance. This is a definite upgrade to my Iridion II. First of all, this one did come with the manual, and the manual is in much better condition than my previous manual, so that's really awesome. The box is a little bit beat up, but at the price I got this for, I really can't complain, and if you were to put this in a box protector, it would look pretty good. I already had the cartridge for this game, and the staff were nice enough to allow me to buy just the box and not the cartridge itself, which was awesome. They had Iridion II listed at £15, which is a very good price, but they only charged me £5 because I didn't pick up the game cartridge because I already had that. Complete in-box Iridion II can go for about £50 to £60, so I was extremely happy to pick up what I was missing for just £5 for this game. This game is a fantastic shoot 'em up game, and I really recommend it. I'm really happy to have the box for this because this game is absolutely amazing, and I didn't think I would ever find the box for this, so I'm super happy to have this now complete in box. That's Iridion II on the Game Boy Advance. The other game I got the box for is Star X on the Game Boy Advance. This is an absolutely fantastic Star Fox clone. If you're a big fan of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, you definitely need to check out Star X on the Game Boy Advance. It's a very similar game, and it's also extremely fun. I believe this was going to be £8, but since I didn't want the cartridge because I already had that, I just wanted this to complete my package. It was only £2 I think for this, which was extremely good because the box itself is in pretty good shape. The only problem is there is a sticker on the back, but I really can't complain at that price to complete my package. Now having this game complete in box is absolutely fantastic because this is another game that I really like that I wasn't going to go out and get the box for individually unless I came across it like this, which was super awesome. That's Star X on the Game Boy Advance. I also picked up 2 Game Boy Advance games that were complete, including the cartridges, and they were only £2 or £3 each. The first one is X-Men on the Game Boy Advance. This is a beat-em-up style game, which I don't know a lot about. It is a movie license game, which sometimes means the game didn't have as much time as it could have had to be worked on because it had to be rushed out to make money alongside the film. That said, I'm a big fan of the X-Men characters, and this game does actually look pretty good, and I can't complain at the price that I picked it up for, complete in box. So it was still pretty cool to grab this. That's X-Men on the Game Boy Advance. And naturally, I also picked up X-Men II: Wolverine's Revenge on the Game Boy Advance. This game is also titled X2 Wolverine's Revenge because that's somehow cooler. It's another platforming style beat 'em up game on the Game Boy Advance. Another game I got for a really cheap price, and I can't resist that to grab a game complete in box, especially when it includes comic book characters. So I think this game could be a lot of fun. I don't know much about this game, but that price is something I really couldn't resist, so I'm happy to grab this nevertheless. That's X2 Wolverine's Revenge on the Game Boy Advance. And I also grabbed this from once because I wanted it, Robo Pit 2 on the PlayStation 1. This was very cheap to pick up and it was a Phoenix budget release, and I have been somewhat collecting Phoenix titles and Midas Pocket Price games because I really enjoy the oddities of them. This game is called Robo Pit 2. It's a sequel to Robo Pit, and it's actually nothing like that. Robo Pit was a one-on-one fighting game. This game, Robo Pit 2, is more like an arena combat game, where you enter an area, defeat the enemy, and move on to the next area. I like this kind of oddity, and it's really cool to pick up stuff like this that's a little more unusual, and I definitely picked it up for a good price. That's Robo Pit 2 on the PlayStation 1. Now on to the pickups from Game Zone in Plymouth. And this first pickup was really exciting for me. Hot Shot on the PlayStation 1. But to talk about Hot Shot, I also will be talking about a collection of PlayStation games from Phoenix called Shoot and a PlayStation 2 game called Deadeye Jim. Let's take a look at the gameplay. So now you are seeing Hot Shot on the PlayStation 1, which is a rail shooter from Phoenix. I was really excited to pick this game up because it is definitely an oddity and it's the type of thing that I love picking up. This game was also included in a collection of games called Shoot on the PlayStation 1, where it was called Ace. It's exactly the same game, and I'll also add that the Shoot collection had a game called Wild West, which was also released under a different name individually. In the case of Wild West, it was released as Wanted. These games are virtually identical except the visual differences. This is the case on a lot of games on the Shoot collection. There are a lot of budget titles. The interesting thing about these games is even though they're so similar, they're still really fun. This is a very fun type of game to play, especially for a quick fix of gaming enjoyment. And the Wild West game was also remade on the PlayStation 2 under the name Deadeye Jim. And as you can see, the gameplay remained completely unchanged as well. This blows me away. It's really funny to see how similar these games are, but I guess when you've got a working formula, you might as well stick to it. So there you go, that's Hot Shot, and you also saw a bit of Wild West and Deadeye Jim in the comparison there as well. Awesome rail shooter action for the PlayStation 1. Phoenix at its best. Now we're going to see some Midas Pocket Price action with Power Pinball on the PlayStation 1. This is another budget release of a pinball game that was released in Japan as Golden Logres. It's a pinball game with a story and another budget release. In case you're wondering, all of these budget releases have black and white discs. Pinball games are another fun find for a little bit of quick fix gameplay. I also really like that these games did find their way overseas, albeit retitled in various budget ranges. It's really cool to pick these up, and it's the sort of thing that I like looking out for. So there you go, that's Pinball Power for the PlayStation 1. And there you have it, those are all of the pickups in this episode of Video Game Hunting. If you like the video, be sure to leave a like or a comment to let me know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content. And if you'd like to, you can also support me through Patreon or YouTube channel membership. Thank you for watching, I've been MVL, and I will catch you next time.